My wife said, Betrayal, you've 7 days to prove your worth keeping. Day 1 I met a stranger. Pick me, found someone better, now she's furious. Imagine being just moments away from securing the biggest deal of your entire career when your phone buzzes. It's not an I love you text from your spouse, but a 5-page performance evaluation of your marriage. Yeah, that actually happened to me. And let me tell you, it wasn't just shocking, it was the brutally honest wake-up call I desperately needed. I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room, the air thick with nervous anticipation, the future of my professional life hanging by a thread. This deal was huge, a potential game-changer. My phone vibrated, and I glanced down to see a message from Emily, husband performance evaluation urgent, followed by a hefty 5-page attachment. The subject line alone made my stomach drop like a stone, but there was no way I could open it. I was literally in the middle of pitching a $2.8 million contract. So, I silenced my phone, took a deep breath, and kept going. The presentation went flawlessly. We shook hands, they promised an answer by Friday, and I walked out of that building feeling like I'd just conquered something monumental. Then, I got into my car, opened Emily's message, and everything, absolutely everything, shifted. It was formatted like an actual HR review, categories, scores out of 10, detailed notes on my alleged failures as a husband. Financial contribution got a 6 out of 10 because, apparently, I was meeting baseline expectations but showing no growth initiative. My emotional availability scored a 4, too much work, she said. And romance? A dismal 3, for forgetting our 3-month anniversary. At the very bottom, in bold red text, she'd written, you have 7 days to prove you're worth staying married to. Don't disappoint me again. I sat there, staring at my phone for what felt like an eternity, maybe 10 minutes. I wasn't angry yet, just profoundly confused. When did my marriage become a job I could be fired from? Let me rewind a bit and explain how Ethan, a 32-year-old regional sales manager making a decent $140,000 a year plus bonuses, ended up here. I own my house outright, a foreclosure I'd bought 6 years ago and spent 2 years fixing up myself. I met Emily 10 months prior at my cousin's wedding. She was a bridesmaid, beautiful, charming, and we clicked instantly. She was 24, a marketing coordinator, ambitious, independent, or so I thought. We dated for 5 months, got engaged, married 3 months later, and honestly, things felt good. Until about 3 weeks after the wedding. That's when she quit her job. She told me she wanted to focus on being a wife, on making our home perfect, on supporting my career so I could advance faster. It sounded so sweet at the time, like she genuinely wanted to invest in us, as a team. I said, okay, thinking maybe she was burned out and just needed a break. But then the spending started. Before we got married, Emily was pretty normal with money. She'd split checks, buy her own things, never expected me to cover everything. After the wedding, it was like a switch flipped. Suddenly, she was ordering $300 worth of skincare products, signing up for a boutique gym that cost $200 a month, getting her hair done every 3 weeks at some fancy salon. I'm not cheap, I never have been, but I started noticing that every week, there was another charge on our joint account for something she needed. I tried to bring it up gently a few months in, asking if maybe we could budget a little better. She looked at me like I'd just insulted her entire existence. I gave up my career for you, Ethan, she snapped. The least you can do is make sure I'm taken care of. It felt incredibly manipulative, but I just didn't have the energy to fight about it then. So, I let it go, figuring we'd work it out eventually. Fast forward to today, to this absolutely insane message, and I finally realized I'd been ignoring a mountain of red flags. I wanted so desperately to believe I'd made the right choice marrying her. I drove home in silence, rehearsing different responses in my head, trying to figure out if I was overreacting or if this was genuinely as crazy as it felt. When I got there, Emily was on the couch, glued to some reality show. She looked up with this expectant smile, like she was waiting for me to apologize. I didn't say anything at first, just walked past her into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. She followed. Did you get my message? Yeah, I got it, I said, my voice flat. Right in the middle of the most important meeting of my career. She didn't even flinch. Good. So, you understand? We need to have a serious conversation about our future. Her tone was so detached, like she was a manager calling an underperforming employee into her office. Are you serious about this whole 7-day evaluation thing? I asked, incredulous. She nodded. Completely serious, Ethan. I've been unhappy for a while, and I need to see real change or I don't think this is going to work. It was so casual, like she was talking about returning a sweater that didn't fit. I stood there, truly looking at her, and I saw someone I didn't recognize anymore. This wasn't the woman I married, or maybe it was, and I'd just been too distracted to notice. I took a deep breath and said something I'd been thinking about for weeks but never had the courage to verbalize. If you're evaluating me, I told her, then I'm evaluating you, too. Consider this a mutual review period. Her face went blank for a second, like she hadn't expected any pushback. Then, she let out a short, dismissive laugh. Fine, evaluate away. I'm sure you'll realize pretty quickly that you're lucky to have me. She walked back to the couch and unpaused her show. I went upstairs to my office and closed the door. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, not really sure what I was doing yet, but knowing that something fundamental had just changed. I pulled up our joint bank account and started scrolling through the last few months of transactions. What I found made my blood run cold. We're talking thousands of dollars spent on things that had nothing to do with running a household. Clothes, restaurants, subscriptions to services I'd never even heard of. And the kicker? Her contribution to any of this was exactly $0. She hadn't worked, hadn't brought in any income, and hadn't even really managed the house because we still ordered takeout 4 times a week, and I was the one doing most of the cleaning. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, I felt something other than confusion. I felt clarity. If Emily wanted to evaluate whether I was worth keeping, then I was damn sure going to evaluate whether this marriage was worth keeping. And I had a feeling I already knew what the answer was going to be. The next day, what I called day 2 of her evaluation, I woke up at 6 a.m. like always, showered, got dressed for work. When I came downstairs, Emily was still asleep in our bedroom, door closed. This wasn't unusual, she rarely got up before 10:30. But today, it hit differently because I was actively paying attention to what she actually did with her time. I made coffee, checked emails, and before leaving, did something I'd never done, I took my laptop with me instead of leaving it at home. I also called my brother, Alex, and asked him to swing by later to pick up some tools I'd borrowed. Really, I was giving him a spare key and asking him to keep an eye on things if the situation escalated. He agreed without asking too many questions, because he's always been good like that. On my lunch break, I logged into our joint account from my office and started building a spreadsheet. Every transaction from the time she quit her job, organized by category. It took me almost 2 hours, but by the end, I had a complete financial picture of our marriage, and it was worse than I thought. Emily had spent $9,200 in the 4 months since she quit working. Clothes, beauty treatments, restaurants with her friends, subscription boxes, online shopping, boutique fitness classes, and a dozen other things that had nothing to do with our household. Her contribution to our joint expenses, groceries, utilities, mortgage, anything that actually kept our life running, was $0. I sat there, staring at the numbers, feeling like an absolute idiot for not catching this sooner. But I was busy working, trying to build a future, and I trusted her to be reasonable. That trust was clearly misplaced. I immediately created a new checking account in my name only and transferred most of my money into it, leaving just enough in the joint account to cover the bills I knew were coming due this month. Then I called my buddy Daniel, a family lawyer, and asked if he had time for a drink after work. We met at a bar near his office around 7 p.m. I laid out the whole situation, the performance review, the spending, the share entitlement, all of it. Daniel listened without interrupting. When I was done, he was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "What you're describing, Ethan, sounds like financial manipulation. Someone who contributes nothing but demands everything, and then threatens to leave if you don't meet their standards, that's controlling you." He advised me to document everything, screenshots, messages, records of all spending, because if this went where he thought it was going, I was going to need proof. Then he told me something I wasn't expecting. He said Emily had been talking about me to mutual friends for months, complaining I was cheap, that I didn't appreciate her, that she could have done better. Daniel said he hadn't wanted to tell me before, thinking it was just normal marriage venting. But combined with everything else, it painted a pretty clear picture of someone who'd been checked out of this relationship for a while. I drove home feeling like I'd just been punched in the stomach. Not because I was heartbroken, but because I was so angry at myself for missing all the signs. When I got home, Emily was in the living room with her friend, Chloe. They were drinking wine and watching something on Netflix. They both looked up when I walked in. Chloe left pretty quickly, saying she had to get home, and I could tell from the look on her face that they'd been talking about me. Once she was gone, I sat down across from Emily and asked her directly if she'd been complaining about me to our friends. She got defensive immediately. "You're being paranoid. I'm allowed to talk to my friends about my feelings." "That's fine," I told her calmly, "but maybe don't post about it on Instagram where 3,000 people can see it." Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" I pulled up my phone and showed her the screenshots I'd taken during lunch. She'd posted a story yesterday about being married to someone who doesn't understand that maintaining yourself costs money. And another one this morning about cheap men who expect their wives to look expensive on a Walmart budget. She tried to laugh it off, said she was just venting and didn't think I'd see it. "It's public, Emily," I said, my voice steady. "Anyone, including my coworkers and family, can see it. You're humiliating me online while living off my income." She got quiet. Then she said something that genuinely shocked me. "Maybe if you made more money, I wouldn't have to complain." I just stared at her. "I make $140,000 a year. We have no debt except a tiny mortgage, and she spends money like we're pulling in $500,000. The joint account," I told her, "is going to be for household expenses only from now on. My paycheck will go into a separate account. If you need money for personal things, you can get a job like every other adult." She lost it. Started yelling about how I was trying to control her, how I promised to take care of her, how this wasn't what she signed up for. I stayed calm. "I didn't sign up to be an ATM with a wedding ring, Emily. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership. And right now, I'm the only one contributing anything." She stormed off to the bedroom and slammed the door. I spent the rest of the night in my office, going through more bank statements and screenshotting her social media posts. Day 3, I worked from home and finally watched what Emily actually did all day. She woke up at 11 a.m., made herself breakfast, spent 2 hours on her phone, went to a yoga class, came home, showered, and then sat on the couch scrolling through shopping apps until I was done working. She didn't clean anything, didn't cook, didn't do laundry, didn't even take out the trash. When I asked her what she did today, she said she was busy and seemed genuinely offended that I was questioning her. That evening, I got a text from Daniel saying he heard from another friend that Emily had been telling people she was keeping her options open. Apparently, that's code for, she's already thinking about her next relationship before this one is even over. I didn't confront her about it yet. I was still gathering information, still building my case. But internally, I'd already made my decision. Day 4, I met with the lawyer Daniel recommended, a sharp woman named Sarah who specialized in divorce cases. I walked her through everything. She took notes, asked questions about assets and timelines, and told me that if we moved forward, I'd want to act fast before Emily figured out what was happening and started hiding things or making accusations. I left Sarah's office with a folder full of paperwork and a retainer agreement. On my drive home, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt like I was back in control of my own life. When I walked through the door that night, Emily was waiting for me, arms crossed. And I knew from her expression that she'd figured out something had changed. She just didn't know what yet. By day 7, Emily learned what my worth actually was when it disappeared completely. Day 5 started with me making phone calls from my office at work, the kind of calls you make when you're systematically removing someone from your life. First, I called our phone carrier and moved Emily's line to a separate account under her name. She could keep the number, but she'd have to pay for it herself starting next month. Then, I called our car insurance company and removed her from my policy. She's listed as a driver on my car, but it's titled in my name only, so legally I could do this. I updated all my beneficiary information on my life insurance and retirement accounts, changing everything from Emily to my brother Alex. I sent an email to HR at work doing the same thing with my health insurance and 401k. The whole process took about 3 hours, and by the time I was done, I felt lighter, like I'd been carrying something impossibly heavy and finally put it down. I left war. Early and drove straight to Sarah's office where I signed the divorce petition and wrote a check for her retainer. She told me the papers would be ready to serve by tomorrow and asked if I wanted to be there when it happened. No, I told her. Just have the process server go to the house in the morning when I'm at work. That evening, I came home. Emily was in the kitchen, making herself a smoothie. She asked me if I'd thought about her evaluation and what changes I was planning to make. I looked at her, standing there in her expensive workout clothes, with her fresh manicure, holding a $400 blender, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. I've thought about it a lot, I told her, and I'll have an answer for you tomorrow. She smiled, like she'd already won, and went back to her smoothie. Day 6 is when everything fell apart for her. I went to work like normal. Around 10 a.m., I got a text from my neighbor Mark with a photo attached. He's the retired guy 2 doors down who I helped with his fence last summer. The photo showed Emily screaming at a process server on our front porch. Apparently, she didn't take the divorce papers well. My phone started blowing up with calls and texts from her, but I ignored all of them. I was in back-to-back meetings all day, and I genuinely didn't have time for her drama. Around 3 p.m., Alex called and told me I needed to come home, that Emily's mother, Brenda, had shown up and they were both losing their minds. I told him I'd be there in 30 minutes and I left work early for the second day in a row. When I pulled into my driveway, there was a car I didn't recognize parked on the street. I could hear yelling from inside the house before I even opened the door. Emily and Brenda were both in the living room. Emily was crying, and Brenda was pacing back and forth, talking on her phone. When I walked in, they both turned to look at me like I was the villain in their story. Brenda hung up and immediately started in on me about how I was ruining her daughter's life, how I was abandoning my responsibilities, how no real man would treat his wife this way. I let her finish. Then, very calmly, I told her that her daughter hadn't worked in 4 months, had spent over $9,000 of my money on personal luxuries, publicly humiliated me on social media, and gave me a literal performance review like I was her employee. Brenda looked at Emily for confirmation, and Emily just stood there crying, not denying any of it. I told them both that I was done with this conversation and that they needed to leave. Brenda said Emily lived here and didn't have to go anywhere. So, I pulled out my phone and showed them the 30-day notice to vacate that Sarah had drafted. Emily had 30 days to find somewhere else to live. After that, I could pursue formal eviction if necessary. Brenda's face went red and she started yelling again, calling me every name she could think of. Emily just crumpled onto the couch, sobbing. I went upstairs to my office and locked the door. I could hear them downstairs for another hour before they finally left. Around 8 p.m., my doorbell rang. I looked through the window and saw Emily standing there with 2 of her friends. I opened the door, and before I could say anything, she pushed past me into the house. Her friends followed, and suddenly, I had 3 women in my living room staging what I guess was supposed to be an intervention. Emily was calmer now. She wasn't crying anymore. She told me that she overreacted this morning, that she was shocked and hurt, but she was ready to talk rationally now. She said she knew she made mistakes, but so did I. That marriage is about compromise, that we can work through this if I just cancel the divorce and give her another chance. Her friends nodded along like this was a reasonable request, like the last 4 months hadn't even happened. I stood there, listening to her talk, and I realized she still didn't get it. She still thought this was negotiable, that she could manipulate her way back into the life she had. When she finally stopped talking, I looked at her and said the only thing that needed to be said. You had 7 days, I told her, and you wasted all of them. Her face changed. The fake calm disappeared, and she started yelling again about how I never loved her, how I used her, how she gave up everything for me. I didn't argue, because there was no point. I just told her and her friends to leave, and that if they didn't, I'd call the police. They left, but not before Emily told me I was going to regret this, that she'd take me for everything I had, that I'd end up alone and miserable. I closed the door behind them and changed all the locks that night. I'd ordered new hardware online 2 days ago, and it had arrived that morning. Day 7 was quiet. Emily didn't come by, didn't call, didn't text. I went to work, came home, and spent the evening packing up her belongings into boxes that I'd have delivered to wherever she ended up. I found clothes with tags still on them, shoes she wore once, beauty products that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Every box I packed felt like evidence of how blind I was. How I let someone take advantage of me because I wanted to believe I made the right choice. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Because I knew it was finally over. I knew that I was getting my life back, and I knew that Emily was about to learn a very expensive lesson about what happens when you mistake someone's patience for weakness. 6 months later, the divorce is finalized. I'm sitting in my living room with a cup of coffee, thinking about how different my life looks now. Emily tried to fight for alimony, but her lawyer couldn't make a case when she'd only been unemployed for 4 months of our 8-month marriage and had no dependents. Last I heard from Daniel, she's working retail at a mall across town, living with 2 roommates in a small apartment, and dealing with credit card debt from trying to maintain her lifestyle after I cut her off. I don't take any pleasure in her struggles, but I also don't feel guilty about them. She made her choices, and these are the consequences. As for me, I got that $2.8 million contract approved 3 weeks after the divorce was filed, which came with a promotion and a significant raise. I've been seeing someone new for about 2 months now, a veterinarian named Olivia, who owns her own practice and insisted on splitting the bill on our first date. She's 30, financially independent. And when I told her about Emily, she said something that stuck with me: anyone who makes you prove your worth doesn't understand what partnership means. I think about that performance review sometimes. About how insulting and dehumanizing it was to have my value as a husband reduced to scores and metrics. But I also think about how it was the wake-up call I needed. How, without that moment of clarity, I might have stayed in that marriage for years, slowly losing myself while Emily drained my bank account and my self-respect. She wanted to evaluate my worth, and in doing so, she revealed her own. Or rather, the complete absence of it. So, I'm curious, if you were in my shoes, faced with a marriage performance review like that, what would your first move have been? Do you think I overreacted, or was I completely justified? Drop your thoughts below. I'm reading everything.